Panzer tanks, V-1 and V-2 rockets, U-boats. Its technology concentrated solely on military victory. Between 1933, when Hitler came to power, and the outbreak of war, Germany became one of the most advanced technological countries in the world. The rise of fascism allowed many areas of scientific research to blossom.
Nazi ideology was also involved in very deep and profound scientific discoveries that we today regard as extremely important. It's not just bad guys wearing black hats. It's also a movement that managed to support and endorse and further these scientific advances that are really world class.
You've got all this money for science, so science not only survived, it often thrived under Nazi Germany.
And at times, at appalling human cost. Many scientific advances were exploited in the ruthless pursuit of fascist ideology. Others, some of which in time became the most significant inventions of the 20th century, were ignored because they were deemed irrelevant to the success of the Nazi cause. This is the real story of the scientific triumphs and failures of Hitler's Germany. Adolf Hitler's regime was based on the ideology of an all-powerful, all-conquering German master race. It followed, therefore, that anything that undermined the health of the Aryan race had to be eradicated. It was not surprising that it was German doctors who first discovered the link between smoking and cancer. For the Nazis, the abuse of tobacco fitted into a broader ideology of eugenics and racial purity.
The Nazis had this view that your body belonged to the Führer, your body belonged to the nation. You were not supposed to abuse your body because you were really hurting state property when you smoked or when you drank or when you used drugs. And as a result, there was this view that anything you did that was hurting your body was hurting the state.
Hitler's own health was fragile, and he was a hypochondriac. He daily consumed a whole battery of medicines and potions for his stomach, bowels and heart. He was also a teetotal vegetarian, which he thought was appropriate for the head of the master race.
You had the Aryan man, and they often looked like these Greek statues. They also wanted to eat right, fiber and fruits and vegetables, everything we say these days about eating healthy. You had these movements in other countries as well, but it wasn't part of state ideology. And when you have a totalitarian, centralized government, it can become part of state policy.
Vorführungen der Gruppe Turnen.
The ideology of the master race demanded superfit young men and lissom girls. Propaganda films promoted healthy living and outdoor activities in the dramatic landscape of the fatherland. The well-being of the nation also resulted in a broad assault on what German scientists of the time identified as threats to public health.
I think of the Nazi period as this quest for a sanitary utopia, an effort to clean up the air. They wanted clean water. They actually even wanted a healthy workplace. You find the first good studies on the tobacco causation of cancer in the Nazi period, the first studies of asbestos causing lung cancer in the Nazi period, the first studies even of indoor radon causing lung cancer, and many other carcinogens are first identified in the Nazi period.
So it was in Germany in the 1930s that the first serious and systematic attempt was made to establish a link between cancer and smoking.
What you have in the Nazi period is animal experiments that were large-scale, using many animals. You have the development of case control epidemiological methods, that is, methods where you would compare one population that smoked with a very carefully balanced similar population, same age, same race, same health condition, who didn't smoke, and then you would see which had the higher rate of lung cancer, and they found that there was a significantly higher lung cancer rate among the smoking population.
Once the link between cigarette smoking and cancer had been established, it became clear that every effort had to be made to protect the master race from its effects. Safeguarding the purity of the stock was critical. Anything that might endanger the health of the Aryan child was forbidden.
They thought that, especially German women, by smoking would be reducing the fitness of their offspring. This was viewed as something that was actually a crime against the German fruit of the womb, you might say, and that by smoking you were actually damaging the future of the German race.
Well, that certainly fit in with the eugenic policy, that, you know, if you're going to breed a better man, you want them to be healthy. If smoking is bad for the organism and causes cancer, we don't want to perpetuate that in our race.
Tobacco smoking was attacked as an epidemic, a plague. Along with alcohol, it was portrayed as a corrosive disease of liberal decadence. Smoking was discouraged in the armed forces and banned altogether in the Nazi Party offices. By 1943, it was illegal for young people under 18 to smoke in public, and a year later, smoking was outlawed in all urban trains and buses. Hitler banned everyone from smoking in his presence, though he had been a smoker himself in his youth. He even attributed the success of the National Socialist Party to his decision to give up.
He credits the triumph of fascism to his giving up smoking. He apparently smoked until around World War I, where he says he threw his cigarettes into the Danube and never looked back. And he says if he hadn't given up smoking, he wouldn't have been able to organize the Nazi movement in Germany. So this was something very, very close to his heart.
What's more, on this particular issue, Hitler was convinced he had the edge over the Allied leaders.
One of the interesting things about the politics of this time is that all three of the fascist leaders, Mussolini, Franco, and Hitler, were at least non-smoking, whereas all three of the Allied leaders, Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, were very heavy smokers.
The American people, through their elected representatives in Congress, have determined to wage unremitting warfare against cancer.
This is an American public information film made in 1940. It shows clearly that cancer was regarded as a public health issue of some seriousness. It gives advice about how to avoid the disease.
Chronic irritation often influences the appearance of cancer. The chafing of a jagged tooth, the rubbing of...
But it makes no mention of smoking being a cause of cancer. It wasn't until 1950 that Allied scientists caught up with their German counterparts, and much later before positive action was taken to deter people from smoking. The discovery of the link between smoking and cancer was an example of good science being usurped by the Nazis for their own ends. It gave ample ammunition to the Nazi propagandists who were proclaiming the ideology of the master race. And it wasn't long before Hitler's propaganda machine was exploiting a new technology that could spread the fascist message more effectively than ever before.
Scores of microphones and cameras were used to photograph Hitler and record his voice, so that all of Germany and others throughout the world could receive his message of hate and hypocrisy.
The success of the Nazi Party in the early 1930s depended in part on savage repression, but also on the persuasive power of propaganda. Hitler's cold-blooded and calculating propaganda minister was Dr. Joseph Goebbels. He had masterminded the slick presentation of the Nazi anti-Semitic message, using all the available technology at his disposal. But a new invention was in production that would transform Goebbels' propaganda machine and make it even easier for the Führer to be heard throughout the fatherland. This new and revolutionary technology owed a great deal to an obscure Austrian engineer living in Germany in the years after the First World War. His name was Fritz Fleumer. In the 1920s, Fleumer had the brilliant idea of coating paper with iron powder to make a cheap magnetic audio tape. This paper tape was fragile, but it would replace the existing expensive magnetic solid steel tape, and it could be edited with a pair of scissors rather than a soldering iron. Fleumer knew he was onto something revolutionary.
Fritz Fleumer took his invention to Berlin, to AEG, which was one of the leading electronics companies in those days, and they bought the patents and so on from Fleumer. and set up in 1932 a team to begin work on Das Magnetophon, the magnetic phonograph.
AEG joined forces with the German chemical giant IG Farben to produce the world's first magnetic tape recorder. It would revolutionize sound recording. But when AEG demonstrated the new invention at the Berlin Radio Fair in 1935, it was not quite the overnight sensation they hoped for.
The radio engineers looked at this and said, aha, this is it. Tape would be the ideal medium. We could record on it, we can snip it up, we can glue it or tape it back together and edit the shows to our heart's content. It would be a dream come true. One problem. The original AEG magnetophone shown at the 1935 Radio Fair sounded terrible.
The quality was only just good enough for use as a dictation machine. The Nazis did use the early magnetophone to listen into and record telephone conversations. But its commercial potential, as AEG recognized, was extremely limited.
They instantly saw that there would be no business based on dictation purposes only. They had to have the possibility and the technical means to recording music. That would make the business.
In 1936, as the Nazis consolidated their power in Germany, the world-famous conductor Sir Thomas Beecham took his orchestra to Berlin and made this recording on the new equipment. It was a disaster.
It sounds truly terrible. In fact, Sir Thomas was so horrified by the quality of what he thought was tape that he reputedly refused to use it until, I think, 1951.
Then, just as the war was starting in 1939, came an accidental discovery that changed utterly the prospects for the magnetophone. A German radio engineer, Walter Weber, stumbled on a signal processing method called AC bias that enabled the magnetophone to record high fidelity.
Weber one day was experimenting with circuits, advanced circuits that would try to get this horrible noise and distortion to a minimum and make the tape sound better. And he discovered, quite by accident, AC bias, this oscillating tone you would superimpose over your recorded information that would make that recorded information stand out.
A second test was carried out on the new, improved magnetophone. It was the revolutionary breakthrough the technicians had been searching for.
This was the introduction of the high-frequency bias magnetophone to the public. And it took place in a huge Berlin cinema, and people were amazed. That was the moment. That was the moment everybody recognized instantly that's the best method for recording music, and that will make a revolution.
After 1941, as Germany was stepping up its assault on the Soviet Union, the magnetophone became a must-have item for wealthy Germans. An American document of the time describes how Hitler himself, at the height of the fighting on the Eastern Front, acquired his own machine.
Hitler was first introduced to the magnetophone in his headquarters on the Russian front in 1942, and immediately he ordered a plane to bring additional symphony recordings from Berlin.
So Hitler was photographed.
Goebbels' propaganda machine knew it was onto a good thing and exploited to the maximum the new possibilities that the magnetophone offered.
Hitler.
There were about 6 recordings of Adolf Hitler's speeches during the World War.
Die 2 Jahre, die ich für Deutschland.
And Hitler didn't come to the studio, so studio came to Adolf Hitler, and they used transportable units of magnetophones to record these speeches. These recordings were edited and broadcasted to the public for propaganda means.
Hitler sobbing, Hitler smiling, Hitler shouting, Hitler working his people into a frenzy.
Hitler's propagandists discovered the magnetophone could be used to time-shift the Führer's speeches. Utilizing the sophisticated radio network inherited by the Nazis from the previous democratic regime of the Weimar Republic, Hitler could record a speech on tape in one city for transmission in another. There were even suggestions that Hitler used the new technology to deceive his enemies as to his precise whereabouts.
There's a persistent myth that still lives today that, Hitler